There were many Horace Greeleys. There was the Horace Greeley who founded the New York Tribune and used it to advance his anti-slavery views and shape Northern political discourse. There was Horace Greeley, the Whig politician, who served a few months in Congress after winning a special election in 1848 to complete an unseated representative's term. Then there was Horace Greeley, the Republican operative, who helped thwart William H. Seward's bid for his party's nomination for president in 1860. Later would come Horace Greeley, the Democratic politician, who was nominated in 1872 both by the Democratic and the small liberal Republican Party to run against Ulysses S. Grant, who crushed him in one of the biggest landslides of the 19th century. But before that, there was Horace Greeley, the Civil War polemicist. Historian David M. Potter wrote that in January 1860, shortly after John Brown's hanging, Greeley in the Tribune warned Democratic disunionists that Virginia had no monopoly of the hanging of traitors. During the campaign for Lincoln's election, Greeley declared that if South Carolina should undertake to repeat in 1861 the tantrums of 1833, she would be treated as she was then, kindly but firmly. That was a reference to Andrew Jackson's crackdown on South Carolina's short-lived attempt to nullify the so-called Tariff of Abominations. Old Hickory got congressional backing to enforce the tariff by force, but went on to sign a compromise tariff bill averting the crisis. Potter adds that by 1861, Greeley was goading the administration into a premature and bloody battle on the plains of Manassas. But in between his diatribes on South Carolina and Manassas came yet another Horace Greeley, starting just after Lincoln's election and more or less continuing into January. Meet Horace Greeley, the would-be peacemaker. In the November 9, 1860 edition of the Tribune, Greeley sounded anything but bombastic. The Telegraph informs us that most of the Cotton states are meditating a withdrawal from the Union because of Lincoln's election. Very well, they have a right to meditate, and meditation is a profitable enjoyment of leisure. We have a chronic, invincible disbelief in disunion as a remedy for either Northern or Southern grievances. We cannot perceive any necessary relation between the alleged disease and this ultra-heroic remedy. Still, we say, if anybody sees fit to meditate disunion, let them do so unmolested. And now, if the Cotton states consider the value of the Union debatable, we maintain their perfect right to discuss it. Nay, we hold with Jefferson to the inalienable right of communities to alter or abolish forms of government that have become oppressive or injurious. And if the Cotton states shall become satisfied that they can do better out of the Union than in it, we insist on letting them go in peace. The right to secede may be a revolutionary one, but it exists nevertheless, and we do not see how one party can have a right to do what another party has a right to prevent. We must ever resist the asserted right of any state to remain in the Union and nullify or defy the laws thereof. To withdraw from the Union is quite another matter, and whenever a considerable section of our Union shall deliberately resolve to go out, we shall resist all coercive measures designed to keep it in. We hope never to live in a republic whereof one section is pinned to the residue by bayonets. David M. Potter, in his 1941 article Horace Greeley and Peaceable Secession in the Journal of Southern History, made a point of debunking earlier historians' tendency to take Greeley's championing of peaceful separation at face value. Pointing to the brevity of Greeley's dovish period, about 2 months, and its timing, immediately after Lincoln's election, Potter wrote, "Clearly the abhorrence of force which is attributed to Greeley as of November 1860 was, if sincere, both brief and out of character." Potter also thought Greeley gave himself wiggle room in the next paragraph of his editorial. But while we thus uphold the practical liberty if not the abstract right of secession, we must insist that the step be taken, if it ever shall be, with the deliberation and gravity befitting so momentous an issue. Let ample time be given for reflection. Let the subject be fully canvassed before the people, and let a popular vote be taken in every case before secession is decreed. Let the people be told just why they are urged to break up the Confederation. Let them have both sides of the question fully presented. Let them reflect, deliberate, then vote, and let the act of secession be the echo of an unmistakable popular fiat. A judgment thus rendered, a demand for separation so backed, would either be acquiesced in without the effusion of blood, or those who rushed upon carnage to defy and defeat it would place themselves clearly in the wrong. As it turned out, voters in Texas, Virginia, and Tennessee did approve secession in popular referenda, but by then Greeley's pacifist period had passed. Potter saw Greeley appointing himself the arbiter of whatever his highly subjective criteria, deliberation, gravity, ample time, etc. were being fulfilled. Secession not being done in the right way might be grounds for beating the war drums anew. Greeley outlined the right way on November 26th. We trust, therefore, that if the Cotton States should resolve to secede, they will quietly and inoffensively announce their determination to do so, asking Congress to call a convention to arrange the terms of separation. They must be aware that this is a work of difficulty, that time is required to effect it, and that the President will be constrained by his inauguration oath to collect the revenue and enforce the laws throughout the entire area of our country until such separation shall have been duly effected. But if they really desire to go out and will allow time to effect the separation peacefully, we shall do what we can to persuade the North to accede to their wishes. Potter believed Greeley said one thing and meant another, and that to veil this inconsistency, he resorted to one of the oldest and simplest tricks of casuistry, an alteration in the definition of his words. The secession of which he spoke was antithetical to secession as it was generally understood. His doctrine of dissolution by general consent had no more to do with secession than philosophical anarchism has to do with bomb throwing. Potter argued that Greeley knew that a denial of the right of secession would constitute a challenge to the South to assert it, whereas an acceptance of it would cause the South to consider more carefully the advantages of the Union and the self-inflicted penalties of destroying it. But if Greeley was impelled partly by a desire to stay the secession movement in the South, he was governed scarcely less by a purpose to prevent a policy of appeasement at the North. If in fact he felt any real tolerance of disunion, it sprang not from his horror of war, but from his horror of slavery and of compromise with slavery. But the one alternative which did most to condition Greeley's response was that of compromise. Compromise was a familiar, recurrent experience, whereas fratricidal warfare remained a contingency often discussed but never realized. When at last it dawned upon Greeley that he was confronted by a revolution in the game of party politics, he beat a retreat in haste behind a cover of equivocations, quibbles, and puns on the word secession. It's worth mentioning yet another Horace Greeley, the one Alexander H. Stephens, in the diary he kept during his imprisonment for several months after the war, called An Honest and Truthful Man, citing high regard for his directness of principle and integrity of motive. In 1866, Greeley called for Jefferson Davis either to be freed or put on trial, and in 1867, he helped pay the $100,000 bond to release Davis. What do you think of Greeley's Let Them Go in Peace editorial? Let me know in the comments. As always, I've got a companion post with additional context at my website, so click the link in the description below and help this little channel keep growing by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with anyone who might be interested. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.